This is one of those rare issues, because of its magnitude, because of its scope, that if we don't get it right, we may not be able to reverse. And we may not be able to adapt sufficiently. There is such a thing as being too late when it comes to climate change.
The Clean Power Plan, introduced by President Obama in 2015, was the United States' most ambitious policy put forward to combat climate change. The U.S. generates the second highest amount of CO2 emissions in the world, and if left unchecked, these emissions could make the Earth uninhabitable. The plan targets the electricity sector, as this sector contributes to over 1/3 of our nation's carbon dioxide emissions.
We limit the amount of toxic chemicals like mercury and sulfur and arsenic in our air or our water, and we're better off for it. But existing power plants can still dump unlimited amounts of harmful carbon pollution into the air. For the sake of our kids and the health and safety of all Americans, that has to change. For the sake of the planet, that has to change. So 2 years ago, I directed GINA and the Environmental Protection Agency to take on this challenge.
Until this rule, there were no national limits for carbon pollution. That's why we took action. By 2030, the Clean Power Plan will reduce carbon emissions by 32% below 2005 levels. Under the Clean Air Act, the Clean Power Plan sets a carbon pollution goal for each state, and it gives states the flexibility to meet their goals in whatever way works best for them. They can help power plants make sure they're running as efficiently as possible, or they can use cleaner plants more often and use more renewable energy. They can also use market-based programs within their state. They can trade emissions with other states, and they can take advantage of energy efficiency to hit their targets.
The EPA filed the Clean Power Plan under Section 111 of the Clean Air Act, first authorized in 1963, which allows the EPA to issue national standards to limit air pollution from sources that may reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health or welfare. The Clean Air Act has seen bipartisan support throughout the years.
The great question of the 70s is, shall we surrender to our surroundings, or shall we make our peace with nature and begin to make reparations for the damage we have done to our air, to our land, and to our water?
The EPA was first established in 1970 and began enforcing the Clean Air Act thereafter. The 1990 amendments expanded enforcement and authorized controls for 189 toxic pollutants.
20 years ago, we started on the job. And if Congress will act on the clean air reforms that I'm offering today, 20 years from now, every American in every city in America will breathe clean air. Ours is a rare opportunity to reverse the errors of this generation in the service of the next. And we must not fail. We must prevail. I ask for your support. We need your support to make all of this into a reality.
The Clean Power Plan was able to build off of the Clean Air Act after the EPA's 2009 endangerment finding, which found that current and projected levels of 6 greenhouse gases threaten the health and human welfare of current and future generations. Under the Clean Power Plan, options for cutting emissions include investing in renewable energy, energy efficiency, natural gas, nuclear power, and shifting away from coal-fired power. As an energy source, coal emits one of the greatest amounts of carbon dioxide, and although it's relatively less expensive than renewables, natural gas has become easier to extract, less expensive, and arguably cleaner than coal. Still, 27 states asked for judicial review of the Clean Power Plan in West Virginia versus the EPA. They argued that the Clean Power Plan exceeds the EPA's regulatory authority and interferes with state sovereignty under their reading of the Clean Air Act. In February 2016, the Supreme Court stayed implementation of the Clean Power Plan pending judicial review. At this time, then presidential candidate Donald Trump campaigned to remove burdens from coal miners.
And some of the mine owners who have been really decimated and really, in many cases, destroyed by regulation and by what they're doing to the mines. And you look at all the mines that have been closed up. But I brought over some of the miners that we were talking after the speech. And I said, could I ask you, would you ever think of maybe leaving and going into a different industry, going into a different job? And they all said, and I understood this very well, because my father was in real estate, I went into real estate, and we sort of do that. They said, Mr. Trump, we love mining. We don't want to do anything else. We love mining. I so understood that. It was so incredible. And they all said it at the same time. They want to be miners. But their jobs have been taken away. And we're going to bring them back, folks. We're going to bring them back.
About 2 months into his presidency, President Donald Trump began taking steps to undo the Clean Power Plan legislation.
Well, welcome to the EPA. Perhaps some of you, this is your first visit to the EPA. It's good to see some coal miners here at the EPA. So welcome to you here.
Over 130 mines have been shut down since 2009. As today's actions demonstrate, under President Donald Trump, those days are over because the war on coal is over.
First, today's energy independence action calls for an immediate reevaluation of the so-called Clean Power Plan.
This executive order is a rejection of the belief that the path forward on energy is through additional federal regulations.
Basically, you know what this says? You know what it says, right? You're going back to work. That's what it says. You're going back to work. Ready?
Ready to go.
We're ready.
About 6 months later, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt made an announcement.
Tomorrow in Washington, D.C., I'll be signing a proposed rule to withdraw the so-called Clean Power Plan of the past administration and thus begin the effort to withdraw that rule. They were using every bit of power, every bit of authority to use the EPA to pick winners and losers in how we generate electricity in this country. And that's wrong.
Here's a reaction from the past administration.
Well, I was surprised that they decided to repeal the rule without proposing anything else in its stead, because as the science dictates and as the law dictates, the EPA is obligated to regulate carbon pollution from this sector. So it surprises me that they weren't a little bit more sensitive to the court challenges and what the courts have been telling EPA for many years, which is you need to regulate this. So instead, they took a look at it and decided that they'd repeal, and then sometime later in the future, they'd start asking questions, even fundamental ones, about whether or not they actually have to do anything.
So what's next? At this point, the EPA has removed information about the Clean Power Plan from its websites. The EPA will hold a public hearing on November 28th to 29th in Charleston, West Virginia, on the proposed repeal of the Clean Power Plan, and will accept comments on the proposal until January 16th, 2018.